What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp podcast. I am here with Steve
Hello.
and Tim.
About to sauce them up.
And this week's episode, we're just going to be covering some NHL news, talk about some Canadian teams up north, and anything else that pops in our head. So, we're going to start with something that is, the biggest story in the NHL over the past week. Outside of the Patrick Laine debut with Columbus, which is a Tony Deangelo situation with the New York Rangers. So a little bit of backstory to this to kind of set the stage for those of you who either aren't aware or
Tony Spagnoli's a cuck.
or don't really know about the history there with Deangelo and everything that goes on. So Deangelo was originally a draft choice of the Arizona Coyote or the Lightning, I believe.
Yeah, the Lightning.
And then he was traded to the Coyotes, and then eventually was traded to the New York Rangers. He has a troubled past in terms of his discipline. He was suspended in juniors for violating their diversity policy. The rumors are that he was using, racial slurs about, teammates and opponents and stuff like that. The quote was a most inappropriate statement to a teammate the one time. He also got a couple of suspensions for abusive officials during his time in the OHL. So he was suspended a lot, and he was suspended at least twice for the harassment, abuse, and diversity policy, and a couple of times for abusive officials. And he's had a reputation as being a difficult player off the ice. And so recently the story goes that, after the game against the Pittsburgh Penguins, we've gotten a couple of different versions of the story. One of the versions is, the general consensus is that he was harassing Alexander Georgiev for something about the game-winning goal in overtime by Sidney Crosby, either a miscommunication or he was just getting on Georgiev's case for the whole game. And then one story goes that Chris Kreider stepped in and punched Deangelo in the face. Another story goes that Georgiev gave Kreider a waffle board to the face, and that Elias Anderson actually had to step in and break up the fight. But the consensus is that one of Deangelo's teammates punched him in the face. And after the fact, the Rangers waived Deangelo, put him on the taxi squad, and the GM said, this is his last game as a New York Ranger. So that's kind of where things stand. Deangelo's always been a very controversial figure in sports for his outspoken, political opinions, blatant spouting of disproven theories by the former president of the United States, stuff like that. So, we'll delve really deep into this, but as two New York Rangers fans, how do you feel about this whole situation? How does this make you feel about the team, the leadership situation on the team, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't really know what you want to hear. That's the wrong way to phrase that. There isn't really much to say, is the better way to phrase that. It's all pretty much on the table. The guy's just an asshole. He couldn't even be professional, and put his own opinions aside at the end of the day. So, fuck him. If you can't do your job at the end of the day, I don't care. Don't pay him.
Well, that's the issue, is he's going to get paid, right? So
I didn't mean that in necessarily the literal sense, but
one of the things that people and I want to make this abundantly clear to everyone that listens, because there's a lot of people who are defending Deangelo on Twitter or on social media saying, oh, I can't believe he's being cut for his political beliefs, and they just don't want him because he's a Trump guy, et cetera, et cetera. The Rangers, for all intents and purposes, were incredibly patient with him on that kind of stuff. Even when he was, echoing things that were proven false and things that were, you know, we'll say questionable. It's not that the Rangers are cutting him because of his political beliefs, because for a long time they were very patient with him. They were like, listen, you know, you can be political if you want, you can say your statements, but you have to tone it back. And then when he wouldn't tone it back, they're like, all right, maybe now you just need to get off Twitter. And they actually had him delete a lot of his tweets. And then they were like, all right, but, you know, just watch yourself. And then eventually when the whole, you know, situation with the former president, when he was suspended, then Deangelo announced that he was getting off of Twitter, and the Rangers again were like, listen, you have to stop saying this stuff. And so, you know, they were very patient with him for somebody that was such a controversial figure for a long time. And we've seen other instances of, what's it called? We've seen other instances of players who are political. We've seen instances like Robin Leonard, you know, at one point had an homage to the former president on his mask. He has since walked that back, and he has since said that he regrets having that support for the former president. He doesn't support him anymore. But, you know, you can be and make political statements. It's just that Deangelo took it to a whole other level, and that's not even the reason why he's being suspended and cut, basically, essentially, from the Rangers team. He's being cut because he's gotten to the point where he's so toxic that his own teammates are forced to physically assault the guy, basically, to get him under control. So I just wanted to kind of make that abundantly clear to everyone that's listening, that it's not because of his political beliefs. It's the fact that he can't rein himself in. So I want to ask you a question. I guess we'll go to Steve on this one. And this isn't, again, I don't think this is necessarily true, but do you think that there's something to be said for maybe the Rangers not having named a captain, that maybe that there was not a lack of leadership, but a lack of an established, you know, leader in the locker room that maybe kind of led to the situation getting worse than it is? Or do you think that this is just, you know, a very unfortunate situation that was going to occur either way? I might be lagging out here. Hold on, we're doing this.
Oh no, my mic was just muted. I'm stupid. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, no. I don't think like a captain would have really changed much of anything, to be honest. Like, I just think Tony Deangelo is just toxic in the long run, and that's really what it is.
It's interesting because, you know, for all intents and purposes, the Rangers are a very, very young team, and we've heard a couple rumors that they were going to name a captain this season. It hasn't happened yet. I don't necessarily think that it's a lack of leadership in the locker room either. But there is something to be said for the fact that, like, let's be honest here, most of the players on this team are still very young. And even when you think of the older players, there's not one specific player except for maybe Chris Kreider that kind of jumps out as somebody that people in the NHL would point to and be like, oh, like, he's a natural born leader. You know, we're not in that locker room, so I'm assuming that there is some level of, you know, hierarchy in the locker room. But you know, some people might try to point to that and say, oh, hey, you know, there's clearly an issue here. And obviously not having a captain doesn't mean there's no leadership in the locker room. The captaincy at the end of the day is just a symbol on a jersey. But there is something to be said for when you have an established captain that people look at them a little bit differently. You know, people are inclined, even if it's just a symbol, to respect the symbolism of that. So, you know, and here's a really difficult question that is going to have to be addressed over the next couple of days, obviously. What do you do at this point? Do you buy him out? Do you just try to bury him in the minors? What if you're
Apparently, there's trade interest, which I don't understand. But if somebody wants him, I mean, I guess they can have him.
I think that's just about the only option, right?
Like if they
If you
really
don't want to,
want him, you can have him because we don't want him.
yeah, like we're trying to get rid of him as a whole completely. So
well, I believe if he is to be bought out, that I think it would only hit the Rangers with like $800-something thousand of a buyout penalty for the next couple seasons, as opposed to his current
4.5.
$4.8 million contract. And I guess this is kind of another question, like in general, do you think that this is something that, do you think teams going forward need to more seriously consider the personality of a player who had multiple issues with toxicity in his own locker room in the juniors? Or do you think that this is more of a independent event that happened? Like, if you're a GM, how much stock are you putting into the personality side of this situation going forward?
I would assume that they already do that. I would think this is just a one case scenario where they slipped through. I don't think that they necessarily recognized it, thought it was as bad as it was, presumed it was going to be this bad the whole way through, and just continued.
I really genuinely think they just thought they could rein him in, and like they
probably
couldn't.
figured, oh shit, good player. Once he hits the city, once he hits like the vibe in New York, because it's a lot more diversified vibe in that sense of personnel, like who you interact with. Maybe he'll, change his views to an extent that he'll be civil, but I can't even be civil.
Do you think the Rangers made a mistake in trading for him?
No, but I think I'm sorry. You go, Steve.
I was just saying hindsight, maybe, but like it's hard to say because he could have been good. Like there's nothing to say that he couldn't have. It's just like he couldn't get over that personality conflict.
The only reason I say no is because if you asked me before the season, before all this happened, I would have said no. And I'm kind of going to stick to that opinion in the sense that I don't want to just jump off the ship because I think that his skill is still there per se. I just don't think that he is there.
It's an interesting complex when you get to the whole skill debate because, I mean, let's be honest here. Like, we've had this discussion before about personality playing much more of a role in hockey than in other sports as far as toxic personalities really ruining good players is concerned. I think we actually talked about it in the last podcast, but I mean, we've had a couple of instances lately where guys with terrible personalities just don't succeed, even though theoretically they have all the skill in the world. I mean, when we look at Nail Yakupov as a big example, he was the most talented in terms of raw skill in that draft, but because his personality was so awful in every single way, he just couldn't make that transition. And here we have a guy like Tony Deangelo who last year put up 53 points in 68 games. I mean,
he was the fourth highest scoring defenseman in the entire league.
Yeah, and that's no small feat at his age, but because his personality is so bad and he's just a terrible, terrible human being, he's basically, I would have to think at this point, more or less out the door. I think. Well, and here's another question. Actually, is a good one I'll ask you. If another team makes a trade for him, do you think that's a mistake?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you can't at this point. You can't chalk it up to we didn't know. Like, you know what I mean?
More so than anything, I think the real issue is that you saw him play in a locker room with a player of color, and like you see it didn't work out, and that was clearly an issue to an extent because I'm not gonna say it was the whole issue, but go back to last season. He wasn't. It was a different climate, obviously, but I think it might have had a big an effect on him as a individual if he really is in that mindset.
Well,
So
sorry.
I just don't know how you could bring him into your organization knowing he has that much of a problem with a group of people.
Yeah, and there's no at this point, and this is why I feel comfortable saying beyond a shadow of a doubt. There's no doubt, there's no question, there's no is he. No, the guy clearly, based on his past history and the current situation, he's a racist. I mean, let's just put it out there. You know what? Like, you don't get suspended twice in juniors for violating diversity policy without some sort of prejudice in your soul. And we've heard it all along that he's had these issues with these people. You know, obviously he's also had issues with people who are not minorities, considering the fact that he got into a physical altercation with a Russian goaltender. But, you know, then the other rumor was that he stole Keandre Miller's first goal puck, which is like, why the hell would you do that? You know, I think his time in the NHL is up, honestly. And if you make a trade for him at this point, I have to think that you either are an arrogant individual as a GM that you think you can turn this guy's personality around, or you're just completely dumb, because there's no question at this point. Multiple suspensions for diversity policy breaches, physical altercation with a teammate, all the stuff he had issues with before via the social media. Like, the guy is just, there's no redeeming that, regardless of how good of a player he really is. So it's, I want to say it's a shame, but it's really not, because the fact that we can get a player like this out of the league is only a good thing. We don't need more ignorant, bigoted individuals playing in the National Hockey League. And I think it would really be a statement to future players and to current players if no team even takes any interest in him, because they all passed on him. If a team wanted him for free, they could have taken him.
Yeah, but the idea is you're not going to help a team like the Rangers out for free. I mean, you're going to push them into you're going to squeeze them if you can.
Right.
You know they have to get rid of him.
I think it would be a good statement from the NHL if every team just looked at this guy and said, listen, we don't want you in this league. And
I agree.
I don't feel bad saying that, because he's a terrible person.
I mean, yeah, he's kind of a shithead. Like, at this point, kind of deserves whatever he gets,
Yeah, and listen, if he gets made an example of, then I have no problem with that. Don't be racist.
It's really not that hard,
So that's where it stands. He's currently on the taxi squad. The Rangers are going to have to figure out what to do with him. I cannot imagine that he stays on this team next year, even if because they're saving money by having him on the taxi squad. But even if there's a taxi squad next year where they can just stash him and save the money, I can't imagine having a player like that even around the organization is a good thing for anybody, honestly.
There's no way.
No, you can't.
Yeah, no. There's just no way.
Even having him travel with the team at this point has, being on a taxi squad has to be an incredibly tenuous situation. It's just, even having him around is just not good for anybody. So I imagine
I doubt he's even really around the team anymore.
Probably not. I mean, I even if he's technically on a taxi squad, they might just be telling him just to stay home.
I think he is. I think I heard from John Davidson, like, they just told him to stay in his apartment.
So, yeah, I mean, very interesting situation. Do you have any final thoughts on Deangelo and the whole situation?
I mean, I don't personally. I think that's kind of just it, right? He's just kind of a shithead and got what he deserved.
From a hockey standpoint, where does this leave the Rangers at this point? because Keandre Miller's had a really good start to the season. Do you think it's just simply a matter of just putting Keandre in the positions that Deangelo used to play in?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, because Deangelo wasn't really bringing anything that Miller doesn't, I don't think. So, um, yeah, I guess we'll just kind of put a bow on that. We'll just wrap that one up, and we'll just say that, it's going to be interesting watching what team Deangelo signs in the KHL with. Because
Pretty much.
that's where all these guys seem to end up. So, we'll skip on that. So let's go to the Ottawa Senators, which is a team that we're going to talk about. What is going on in Ottawa? I mean, we knew going into this season that they weren't going to be chasing a playoff spot or pushing anybody for a playoff spot or anything like that. There was no misconception that the Ottawa Senators were a good team, but they look like
Right.
an even worse team than last year, which is weird considering the upgrades they made in the offseason.
I really think it's just like Matt Murray doesn't look very good. I didn't expect him to defend particularly well, but he's not really providing the band-aid that everybody thought he would, you know?
When was this? Oh, January 27th. Yeah, and it's hard to say because it was an interesting thing to try to judge Matt Murray based on his stats with the Pittsburgh Penguins because they were, a Stanley Cup caliber team for the most part when he was there. But this season he has a .482 and an .849 save percentage. Are we seeing the real Matt Murray? I mean, is this just who he is at this point? Were we blinded maybe by the Pittsburgh Penguins being as good as they were?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, for a lot of it, for as good as those Penguins teams were, they weren't good enough to win without good goaltending, you know? So I don't really think that he's some kind of shell of his former self or anything. I really just think I don't think he was ready for just how much the workload was going to increase in Ottawa compared to Pittsburgh, you know?
Yeah,
Because
there's
Pittsburgh
definitely.
gives up, not Pittsburgh, Ottawa gives up a lot more high quality chances than a team like Pittsburgh would. So I think that really just might be the issue is he's dealing with a lot of high quality chances that he didn't see when he was a Penguin.
Yeah, and I mean, to a certain extent, his numbers were never elite in Pittsburgh. His goals against average outside of his first 13 games in 2015-16, a 241, a 292, a 269, and 287. Save percentages of a 923, which is really good, a 907, 919, and an 899. So his numbers were never elite in Pittsburgh, but I thought it was at least going to be an upgrade over the goaltending that the Senators brought to the table last year, and it's just been a complete meltdown. I mean, I remember talking at the beginning of the season about how I was actually excited to watch some Senators games because they're going to at least be able to compete with some of these teams, but they're out of these games by the end of the first period. I mean, they got scored on 3 times in the first 10 minutes last night against the Edmonton Oilers. 8 goals against, 4 goals against, 5, 7, 6. They're not even in any of these games essentially. I don't know what to make of it really.
Yeah, no, I don't either. And
I mean, also, just no one's stepping up in the Senators group either. You don't see anyone taking a big leadership position. Even Brady isn't really fighting or doing much out there. He's going out he's just getting a couple shots on net a game, having a couple hits, and just that's it. Gets off the ice. you kind of need someone with a name to step up. Like you saw it in Montreal, you saw Jeff Petrie and Tyler Toffoli and Nick Suzuki really step up. So that's also an issue.
Yeah, I mean, Kachuk's having a pretty good season so far statistically. He's got 7 points in 10 games. Shabbat has 5 points in 9 games, and I think he's looked the best by far out of any Senator, honestly, so far this season. Shabbat's just been the Thomas Shabbat that we know he can be. They're not getting contributions from some of the other guys. Like Josh Brown has 0 points so far. Stepan only has 3. Dadonov is a really big disappointment, only 1 goal so far. Stützle, I'm totally willing to give him a pass because I never really ever judge players solely based on their rookie season. Like, I really don't start trying to take into account production in terms of stats until really like their 3rd year, because you give them the 1st year to get, acquainted to the NHL, especially a guy like Stützle who's playing in Germany. The 2nd year, you always have the sophomore slump because the expectations are still there. But by the 3rd season, if you're not seeing at least growth or, at least a good eye test, like the guy looks good, then you can start to worry. But, Stützle only having 3 goals in 7 games at a -7, you can forgive that. The guy's a rookie. He's been playing in Germany his whole life. But it's just Evgeny Dadonov's a big disappointment. Stepan's a big disappointment. And even a team that coming into the season you thought was going to score goals, if nothing else, really isn't putting up that many. And, of course, the goaltending has just been absolutely horrendous.
And I mean, and it doesn't help they get shelled every single night,
Yeah. That's definitely...
but they outscored Edmonton. It just didn't make a difference. Outshot Edmonton, rather, not outscored.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, you would think if nothing else, you could forgive the defense if they were at least scoring goals, but they're really not putting up that many goals. Like, they put up 5 the opening night against the Leafs, then 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 1, 1, 5, 2. They've scored more than 3 goals 3 times, and one of those is against the Leafs and one of those is against the Oilers. Not exactly the best defensive teams in the league. Do you think that there's part of an issue here maybe with we were talking about this last night actually in a group chat. Do you think that there's maybe an issue with the coaching in the Ottawa Senators organization?
It definitely could be. The coach might just have a hard time getting through to the kids.
They have a history of issues with team management, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, their owner was suing the other owner a couple of years ago.
Eugene Melnick, yeah.
And the whole team was like coming out saying how much they hated the locker room a few years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't a pretty scene, that's for sure.
Well, because the Senators are not in the same mode as they were, or at least they shouldn't be in the same mode as they were last year. Where the last year and the year before that, they was just kind of like, all right, we're tanking. It's very obvious and evident that we're tanking. We're not here to win hockey games. But when you invest in Matt Murray, you invest in Evgeny Dadonov, you invest in Derek Stepan, you're telling the team, okay, we're not just content with getting slapped around every night. We might not make the playoffs, but we have to start taking pride in what we're putting out there on the ice. And, start putting up a fight against some of these better teams. Come out and try to beat a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, or come out and try to hold a team like the Oilers to less than 3 goals a game, something along those lines. And they're coming out and they're just complete doormats. So I think it really could be an issue with DJ Smith not really knowing how to transition the locker room from what is essentially a losing culture intentionally to, like, we have to start taking pride in what we're putting out there on the ice. And Do you think that if they come out and are total doormats again this season, that maybe this isn't a setback in terms of player personnel, but do you think that this is a mental setback for a team that should be starting to take those next steps? Do you think that this could hurt them in the long run, having a season like this?
100%. I mean, it could definitely stunt the growth of, well, not the growth, but like a lot of these players might get stuck in. I mean, do you remember Colorado before they traded Matt Duchene? It was like they had all the same signs of turning around and going in the right direction, but for some reason, like bad coaching led to a toxic locker room, which led to them just never being able to go anywhere. And like you can run the same risk here in Ottawa where DJ Smith doesn't know what he's doing. No, I'm not saying he doesn't, but like in theory, he can have no idea what he's doing. It could create a really toxic environment for these players, whether it's through the constant losing or the lack of effort from some players versus others. And it could just fester and breed a really, really like a time bomb that's just waiting to go off in their locker room, you know?
Yeah, I totally would agree with that sentiment. And I think that's kind of a big issue, is that I don't think that DJ Smith is necessarily the right coach to transition from losing locker room to like, all right, boys, let's put our big boy pants on and start putting out a product that we can be proud of. Like, because he was all right for the job when there was really no stakes on the table, but when this actually matters to a certain extent, I'm not seeing the results out of him. And is he in a pretty tough division? To a certain extent, yeah. You have to play the Maple Leafs, the Canadiens, the Jets 8 times a season. It's not easy, but you gotta come out better than. If you're not gonna win games, at least you have to point and say, oh, this was a 1-goal game, or we were close on this one, lost this one in overtime, and I mean, you can't be out of games by the end of the first period, essentially. So that's kind of, one of the situations that the Senators are dealing with. And I think that there's a lot to be said for maybe at some point deciding that this is not the right coach for the job. And I don't know what, how many more. Does DJ Smith survive this year to the end of the year? Is he fired midway? If you had your say, if you were the GM right now, how long of a leash does DJ Smith have right now with this team?
I don't think it's very long. I mean, I might give him to the end of the season, but I don't know if I'd go any longer than that.
What about you, Tim? If you're, I don't remember who the GM's name is at this point. If you're the GM of the Ottawa Senators, how long is the leash for DJ Smith before you're kicking him down the road and looking for another head coach?
3/4 mark. I'm looking to replace him before the season ends, so to jump a new coach in to learn the system, so when we get into the off season, he's more accustomed.
And I guess the other question at this point is, given how terrible the start has been, do you guys think it would just be enough to start seeing the Senators compete in these games, or do you think because of how atrocious the season is, now in order to save his job, Smith has to overperform and get this team to win games? Like, what would you be satisfied with as the GM to keep him around for longer?
I mean, yeah, I would probably say they have to start winning some games. Like, I don't think they have to start making a playoff run or anything, but they definitely have to start winning more and putting out, like, at least some kind of effort.
Yeah, I think, there needs to be some kind of tangible result at this point, because, listen, you're 10 games into the season. If you're the Senators, if you're sitting like 3 3-6-1. You have a couple wins under your belt, have an overtime loss in there, and those 6 losses were like 1 or 2 goal losses. You can afford to give yourself like a bad couple of games, right? Maybe get blown out 1 or 2 games, right? But when you come out of the gate 1-8-1 and you're essentially haven't even been involved in any of these games from puck drop, like, it's not a good look. And for a team as young as the Senators are, you really do need a guiding hand to kind of take them to that next level. And I don't necessarily think that DJ Smith is the answer there in Ottawa. I don't really know that they have anybody on their coaching staff, to be honest with you, that really is the answer. I think they have to go outside the organization at this point, just to give themselves a chance. Like,
Yeah, I mean, they need something.
So, we'll stay in the North Division here, and we'll go over to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the Canadian Division leading Montreal Canadiens. And we talked to them about them a little bit last week. 7-1-2 to this point. They have a 2-game set against Ottawa coming up, so realistically they'll probably be at least 8 wins deep by the end of this, if not most likely 9. What's up with the Montreal Canadiens? How are they winning this many games? What are you seeing out of them so far?
When you play the Canucks 3 times, it's not hard.
Well, okay, we do need to talk about that. So,
but also Tyler Toffoli's literally just a stud. Dude's backhand saucing it from like a top of the circles and just sniping.
So
like, filthy.
Montreal at this point has played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've played 5 games against the Vancouver Canucks, and they've won 4 of them. So this is the debate that I kind of brought up to you guys in the group chat last night. If we ignore those wins, the Canadiens, I think I said, are 3-1-1. So obviously you're removing a large sample size, but they lost to the Maple Leafs on opening night, then they beat the Oilers twice, then split against the Calgary Flames, and then the rest of their games have been against the Canadiens. So, is it the Canadiens are actually just nasty and Vancouver's not as bad as they seem, or B, is Vancouver just not as good as we think it is, and the Canadiens are taking advantage of smacking around a bad team and inflating their record because they have to play the rest of these really good teams down the stretch? I mean, they haven't played the Winnipeg Jets at all yet. They've only played the Flames twice. They played the Maple Leafs once. Are the Canadiens as good as they seem, I guess, is the operative question here.
To be honest, I haven't watched a lot of their games, so I really couldn't tell you.
I honestly kind of think that they are. They are playing well, and they have the most shorthanded goals in the league. So actually, maybe they're not playing that well in terms of a team, but they're playing well enough to win games, and that's kind of what matters. Like, I don't necessarily think that the team is that good, but I think they're playing well enough to win. When you have, I think they have like 7 shorthanded goals already on the season.
Let's see. 4, 5, 6. They have 6 shorthanded goals so far. 2 from Toffoli,
Okay.
2 from Lehkonen, 1 from Armia, and 1 from Jake Evans.
Okay, yeah, so when you have 6 shorthanded goals already on the season, like, your team's kind of saucing them up. And Carey Price is playing very well. I could see like a Cinderella-esque Rangers 2012 run for these guys. I'm going to be honest.
I mean, Toffoli has 9 goals in 10 games, and that's just absurd, first of all.
I mean, it's really not, though. Like, at the end of the last season, he also did this.
Well, I'm saying, like,
he did this in LA. He did this in Vancouver.
I mean, he's never been a goal a game anywhere in his career. That's what we're saying.
I'm saying, like, he's hit 30 goals once. And
but, like, the last stretch that he's had though of teams and games, he's played this well almost every game. Like he's actually just this good, I think now. I don't know what happened. I don't know if he started eating his Wheaties or something, but like the kid's actually this fucking good.
I mean, he's got 13 points. Jeff Petrie has 13 points in 10 games, which
Nick Suzuki has a shit ton also. I think he's like 9 or 10.
he's got 11 points in 10 games.
Yeah.
Drouin has 9 points. Anderson has 8 points, including 6 goals. Like, it's funny because I said at the top of the season when we were talking about our season standings, I said that the Canadiens were a really hard team for me to put out of the playoffs because they had so many guys that could do this. Toffoli could score 30 goals. You know, Kotkaniemi could score in this season 30 points in 56 games, which would be good. Suzuki could have a breakout year. And it looks like every could right now, every coin flip for the Canadiens right now is landing in their favor. Is this just a breakout year as a hockey club for the Canadiens? Is this what we're seeing? Like a renaissance, like you said? Or is this an illusion?
I don't know if it's a renaissance per se, but it's definitely right here, right now in their face, and I think they're making it happen. I don't know how they'll do in the future seasons because I don't know if this will keep up super long term, but they clearly have it right now. That's kind of all that matters.
So at this point, what do you think is the long term, or not long term? We'll say the short term. So for this season, what's the outlook for this team? Like, what should they be aiming for as an attainable ceiling? Is it a Stanley Cup?
They should be going for a non-wild card playoff position right now, without a doubt.
Well, there is no such thing as a wild card this year.
Okay, but like, all right, so a rather higher seeded position. Without a doubt, they should be attaining for a high seeded playoff position right now.
Do you think that they should be aiming? Well, okay, I shouldn't say aiming. Every team aims for playoff success, but do you think it's realistic for them to say that they can be a threat deep into the playoffs this year?
Yeah, I do, and I think that shorthanded goal number kind of proves that.
Why do you say that?
The playoffs are about taking opportunities, and if shorthanded goals are about the biggest opportunity that you can get in a hockey game.
Yeah. There's definitely something to be said for that for that number. And then, you know, you look at the newcomer this year, Josh Anderson's having a really good year. Tyler Toffoli stepped in, he's having a really good year so far. I just part of me wants to say that, oh, you know, these guys are going to drop off and they're going to regress to their natural, like, Jeff Petrie's not going to put up 70 points this year because he's always been a half a point a game player. Toffoli's only hit 30 goals once in his whole career. Like, part of me wants to say that, but then when you watch these games, it's just like, how can you look at this team and say that at this point when they're playing this well in the offensive zone, in the defensive zone, shorthanded, like...
Yeah, no, they just looked really good all over the ice from what I've seen. It's kind of impressive, honestly, how fast the turnaround's been.
Now, here's an interesting question. Do you think any of this has to deal with momentum from knocking off the Pittsburgh Penguins last year?
It definitely could.
Like, in terms of, you know, the younger players like Nick Suzuki and Jonathan, or was Drouin healthy for the playoffs last year? I don't remember. Pull up his stats real quick.
I'm not sure either, actually, to be honest with you.
Playoffs. Yes, he played 10 games last year. Okay. In the 2019-2020 season. He had 7 points in 10 games in the playoffs, so, you know, there's a little momentum for you there, but do you think that this is a team that should be buying at the trade deadline. Like, if we look at the long-term health of this roster, we have to acknowledge the fact that there are several players on this roster who are older. Carey Price himself is now 33 years old. I think Jeff Petrie is in his 30s.
Jeff Petrie's 32, I think.
Jeff Petrie is 33. Shea Weber's 35. Long-term health of the organization. Are you buying at the trade deadline, or are you just going to say, you know what, we're having a great year, but 2 or 3 years from now, who knows what's going to happen with some of these older players? Like, are you going for it all in now? Are you willing to just say this was a good season, but maybe we're not cup contenders? Like, if you're the GM of the Montreal Canadiens, right, it's trade deadline day, and let's assume that they're still in a good position, first or second seed. What are you doing with this team?
I mean,
it depends on the team's performing. Like, if the team's performing well, why break something if it's not broken?
Well, like I said, let's assume they're first or second seed in the Canadian division at that point.
They might try and YOLO it, and I wouldn't blame them, but
I think you're always looking to upgrade your team, no matter what. So, I mean, if there's something out there that they really think will be a big upgrade, then I think, sure, yeah, that could be a good idea. But I really don't think they should go mortgaging their future for it, because there's no guarantee that this bubble doesn't burst next year.
Yeah, and there's a significant pieces on this team are getting older. I mean, how many more good years does Shea Weber have at this point? He's 35. So you were gonna say something, Tim?
No.
Jeff Petrie's 33. Carey Price is 33. Where's the ceiling? When's the roof gonna kind of come in on some of these guys? Well, not the glass ceiling, but when is reality and age gonna start catching up to these pieces? I think is the big question that the Canadiens have to deal with this season. Do you have any final thoughts on the Canadiens? Like, let's have a little fun. Way too early, won't be accurate in about a month. Predictions first at the end of the season. When does the season end for the Canadiens? A first round loss, a second round loss, missing the playoffs. Where do you think this season ends for the Montreal Canadiens?
Second round loss.
Yeah, I could see them getting bounced in either the first or second round. I don't really see them missing the playoffs at this point when they're in a division with Ottawa, and I mean, Edmonton hasn't been great, Vancouver hasn't been all that good, so
yeah,
there's a couple of big question marks in the division for sure.
So you think that they could win that first round series, which is well, okay, the playoff format is really weird because you play, I think, in your division. No, you play in your division for the first round and then you reseed. So you think that, like, if they play a different division, that they're going to be kind of on the outside looking in terms of their position here?
I feel like if they were in the East, they would have a tougher time because there'd be a couple of stronger teams with them. And I also think not competing against Tampa Bay is a big boon for them this year.
Yeah.
But, well, I mean...
Not Detroit, though. Rip Detroit.
Yeah, well, Detroit's getting absolutely shelled, so...
5-1?
I mean,
as we speak.
Yeah. This game started early, too, which I found kind of weird.
Yeah, it started early because they wanted to get the 8 o'clock on national TV as well.
It makes sense. I mean, they wanted to rush along to the game that's actually probably going to be interesting.
So one last thing I know we wanted to talk about before we wrapped up the podcast. I know, Steve, you had mentioned that you would wanted to talk about this. And we got more news about this today, actually. The NWHL and their bubble, their bubble is officially burst. The season is suspended. First it was the Riveters that went home, and then I think it was the Connecticut Whale.
Yeah. That
went home. I know you, Steve, that you had mentioned you wanted to talk about this, so you have the floor. Like, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I just thought it was interesting. I thought it was something we should at least like mention in the hockey world, just because like out of nowhere it was going well for them from what I understand, and all of a sudden it was like, and it's gone. Like two teams pulled out overnight, and it was just like, oh, okay, well, what the hell happened? Like I'm just wondering because it's obviously not like a COVID thing because they were in a bubble, you know, like it's very clear there has to be some sort of monetary issue. So I was just wondering if this is really is like a sign that the NWHL is on shakier financial ground than we thought, or you know what I mean?
It's interesting because they claim that it's from the COVID tests, and they said that they had a couple of positive tests and the trends were quote unquote not heading in the right direction. But I don't understand where that comes from when you're in a bubble.
Right.
And maybe the bubble wasn't as strict as the NHL's bubble was. Maybe there were some issues with safety in terms of that, but I don't I don't know because it was weird when the Riveters first pulled out that they said, "Oh, it's because of health concerns," but they never specifically mentioned positive COVID-19 tests. So
Right.
I don't know. I think that part of it is probably financial. Part of it's probably twofold. It's probably health related and also probably financial. And if that's the case, then that's just really unfortunate. Um, we've had a little bit of a debate about this. Like, what's the direction of the NWHL, and do you think that what do you think the NWHL has to do in order to be successful at this point?
I really just think it's trying to find a way to piggyback onto a bigger
I
platform in
don't have
some
much of an
kind of
opinion,
way.
by the way.
What happened?
He said he doesn't
I
have an opinion.
Oh, I mean, I just think like the game just needs time to grow, and it really just happens to be an really inopportune time trying to grow an independent sports league right now, you know? Specifically considering COVID has changed everything about pretty much everything.
I mean, it's even changed the NHL with. I mean, how many games at this point have we had postponed and shifted to later dates? And you know, do
Too many, honestly.
do you think that maybe at some point the NWHL needs to make a concentrated push to do kind of what the WNBA did and affiliate with the National Hockey League? If assuming that there's interest from the NHL's part on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and tell them they have to like bite the bullet and sign away their league, but at the same time, it's like you might just have to, affiliate because you just need the financial backing of the NHL who can afford to take, a small loss on this if they had to, where they really can't afford to lose money on their own, Like a small league like that continues to bleed money. It's not the same as the NHL, who's, like $100 million operation.
Yeah, for sure. And that I was talking about the other day that I think the NWHL has its own streaming package, but I think in order to grow the game, I think it would be a really good thing if they could affiliate with the NHL in some way and say, hey, you buy the NHL TV package, the thing that I buy every year to stream the games on my computer, you're going to get access to the NWHL games too. You know,
Right.
I think the issue is that if you take into account like the average hockey fan, right? Somebody that pays for the NHL TV app, I don't necessarily know that they would go out of their way. First of all, to your point that you made, Steve, most people don't even know this thing exists.
Right.
Like,
And it's not even like this isn't a sexist thing or us trying to be like, oh, well, men's sports is superior to women's sports. It's kind of just the truth. Like, the NWHL has done a really good job of building a little bit of buzz, but like, the real issue is they've flown so far under the radar, especially like in the New York area where they had two teams for I don't know how long. You know, like they played at Coney Island and they played. I think they moved the Riveters to New Jersey now.
They play
I
at the
don't even
Rock,
know.
yeah.
And it's like I just feel like there was with the NHL affiliation, they could have there was so many more doors just open to them in terms of just like the restrictions. They could play at Madison Square Garden. They could play, you know what I mean? Like the NHL could afford to stage these events at bigger venues or venues that would be more inclusive or more inclined to like spark interest, you know, like they've done it at the All-Star game. They've had like the Team USA women and the Team Canada women come down and play. And it's like that was sick. That was cool. And I thought like the game they played at during the I think it was a skills competition. They had like a 3-on-3 game with the women. I thought that was cool because before that I felt kind of like they were just tokens. They were like, "Oh, hey, here, look at them in the all-star skills competition, like they can do things too." It's like, yeah, we know they can. They're professional caliber hockey players, you know. So it's like, oh, okay, cool, like we got to see the women play and people got to see how exciting it is. And I feel like if the NHL were more like in tune with the NWHL, it could be like promoting those teams, like those women could come out and like also participate in all-star weekend, which oddly enough a lot of them did because a lot of the women in the league are apparently like the women that play on the national team, which would make sense. Like Kendall Coyne Schofield plays in the NWHL, and Amanda Kessel does as well. So it's like there are names that like the NHL is doing a good job of introducing people to, but then the NHL has like no follow up on where to find them, you know, which I think is a really big missed opportunity.
100%. And I mean, us three here are probably three of the bigger hockey fans around. I mean, we watch so much hockey and we're so in tune with the league. Not to toot our own horns or anything, but it's just kind of the reality of the situation. And I couldn't tell you where to find an NWHL game. I have no clue.
Yeah, I have no idea.
And that's a concern because if hockey fans as big as us don't know, the average hockey fan is going to have no clue. And, you know, I think, you know, the part of the issue is, like you said, you know, the NHL can afford to take on these expenses. You know, maybe not necessarily this year, but generally speaking, they can afford to take on these expenses because they can afford to lose some money here and there, as opposed to a self-run league that you're probably operating on the razor's edge anyway. And, you know, I think it would be a great thing for the NHL to say, okay, hey, you bought NHL TV. Well, we're going to also stream the NWHL games for you because then you're appealing to the average hockey fan. You know, oh, it's a slow night, say, you know, tonight, for example. I don't want to watch the 6 o'clock game. I don't want to watch the Tampa Lightning destroy the Detroit Red Wings. Hey, maybe there's an WHL game I'll throw on. Or you have a couple buddies over and you're like, hey, what's on in a, you know, Saturday afternoon? Oh, look, there's an NWHL game on. You know, we'll throw that on the TV, right? And that's really how you grow the game is you get somebody to sit down and say, oh, yeah, let's check it out. Let's see what happens. And then they get into it, you know, and then maybe they pick a favorite team and then start following that favorite team and blah, 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 right?
Well, I mean, it's essentially what the NHL's been trying to do with their own league for years now, which is just like appeal to casual fans and then, you know, build a dedicated fan base. And it's like, so this is just so in tune with what the NHL is already trying to do that I just don't understand why they aren't doing it, you know?
Yeah, and I'm sure that like there's probably some legal nonsense in the background that goes on, but if the WNBA was able to partner with the NBA, I don't see a reason as to why the NWHL wouldn't be able to pony up with the National Hockey League. And it's not like, you know, it's not like there aren't exciting women's hockey games out there. I mean, the women's hockey over the last couple of Olympics has been kind of relatively higher caliber for the most part. And it's an exciting thing to, you know, to watch a lot of these women play because there are some incredibly talented women that unfortunately we really only get to see at their peaks every 4 years. Whereas if they were, you know, ponying up and partying up with the NHL, you probably get to know a lot more of these players. And, you know, if you ask the casual hockey fan to name a professional women's hockey player, chances are they're either going to know like one, like maybe they might know who Haley Wickenheiser is or Shannon Zabados, but they're not going to tell you like, Amanda Kessel or anything like that, you know, and that's kind of the issue where you have to really grow the game by appealing to an average fan as opposed to right now where even super hardcore dedicated hockey fans have no clue where to consume this content. So I think that's something that, you know, I would definitely be interested if they were like, hey, you bought NHL TV, watch some women's hockey. Be like, hell yeah, I'm gonna watch women's hockey. Like, hockey's awesome. Hockey's hockey, and you know the caliber of play from some of these women's teams is incredible. So, yeah, I mean, you know, hopefully we can see the growth of women's hockey, and hopefully we can see continued success for the NWHL. Hopefully they can come out the other side from this canceled tournament on a positive note, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that situation. So is there any last minute things about either the NWHL or the NHL or hockey in general that you guys wanted to talk about?
No, not really.
Not in particular, no.
All right, so that's going to wrap up this episode of the Light on Ant podcast. Next week's going to be our quarter mark podcast, so we'll be handing out some quarter mark grades. We'll be taking a look at the standings, hand out some quarter mark awards like most disappointing, most surprising, etc., and just kind of generally take a peek at the quarter mark of the season, which sounds kind of crazy to say, but like by the time we get around to recording next week, it's gonna be getting to that time. So I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you guys again next time.